Now let's take a look at where that time ends up. And for that, we're going to switch over and take a look at some of the weights and measures reports. And there's only 2 of them, unlike Ag, where there's quite a few. The first is our county monthly report. And I'm going to generate this for everyone. And I'm going to generate it for June of this year. I'll click Enable Editing, and then we'll take a look and we'll see that there's quite a few tabs in this report. The first 2 that you see, they're titled Report Page 1 and Report Page 2. These are the familiar forms that you should recognize. Okay, so that's Page 1 of the CMR that you submit and Page 2 of the CMR that you submit. In addition to that, we have a list of the device totals and the total results for every device type. We have a list of all the inspected locations. And then we have the details of every device inspection that's being included on this report, every petroleum inspection, every price verification inspection, and so forth. And all of this information is through formulas is summarized to our total hours and then onto report 2. So if I look at total number of inspections in for retail motor fuel, you'll see there's a formula there. So what we're trying to do here is within a single package, we're trying to give you not only the report, but all the backup data that you need to verify and validate that report. Okay, so before I move off of page 2, earlier we had a question on where does the other column and where does the other row show up in the CMR on page 2? And the answer to that is the other row is rolled up with initial, new install, and reinspection, and just shows up on the row for that device type. So we had counter scales, and whether we choose the other row or the new install row or the reinspection row, all of those results will show up in this row for counter scales. The other column shows up under the other column here. So we have pass shows up under in, fail, whether it's failing over or failing under, shows up under out, and fail other shows up under the other column. Okay, and then the only other split we have is, actually, I said it incorrectly. So for counter scales, I said all the rows, new inspection, initial, new install, reinspection, and other all show up on this row, which is true. But the initials show up here, the reinspection show up here, the new install show up here. The others are combined with the initial inspections and show up here. So hopefully that was more clear to you than it was for me to explain. But one thing you can definitely do in the test system is try entering numbers in different places and run the report and see where they show up. Okay, the bottom part of the report covers your quantity control. So here's our price verification inspection information that we put in, and then that all rolls up to page 1 of the report with our total locations, total inspections, number of violations issued. We do track number of consumer complaints and other complaints here for investigations, but the remainder of these rows we don't fill in. So these you'll have to fill in manually after you've generated this report before you send it off to DMS. Now, if we look at the bottom part of page 1, we've always had this row. On the old CMR, these 2 rows were blank. There was nothing in here, and I filled them in with, on row 15, I add additional program direct hours, and you'll see we've got 4 hours under devices and 4 hours under quantity control. And that ties back to our timesheet. If you recall, on our timesheet, I entered 8 hours here, 4 hours under quantity control and 4 hours under devices. Okay, so those 4 hours show up in the CMR as other program direct hours. Okay, so it's a way of putting time in the CMR without actually doing it on an inspection record.
Hey, John, question.
Yep.
If we go back to the CMR,
Yep.
if we put the indirect hours, the professional indirect hours, would that show up as weights and measures support hours, or is that
Nope.
like the other for trainee kind of person?
I'll show you that configuration in just a sec. There's a
Okay.
specific configuration that will put hours under support hours.
Okay.
Everything that I'm looking at here is under professional support, and so it's classified as the direct hours for, rows 14, 15, 16, 17.
Okay.
So if I had gone a step further here, and I take these measuring devices and I actually assign a specific device type, then those 4 hours, instead of showing up here under additional program direct hours, those would actually show up under that device type in the device hours column. So you can direct non-inspection time to page 2, or you can direct it to page 1, row 15, by specifying program, subprogram, device type, or program, subprogram. Okay, so those are direct hours. Now, if you recall, I also put in 8 hours of indirect time. Indirect meaning it's assigned to weights and measures, but I gave no specification on the subprogram. So it has to spread those hours across these subprograms. And you'll see here, this is obviously an allocation calculation. And how did I come up with 4.31 and 3.69? Well, there's actually a tab in the spreadsheet that shows you that allocation calculation. That's taking 8 hours of indirect time and then spreading that based on 8.75 hours direct hours for devices and 7.5 hours direct for quantity control, which gives us these allocation percentages, which multiplied by 8 hours gives us these two allocations that then appear in the indirect time allocation row on page 1. Now this report and those calculations I just went through, I sat down with DMS and got their approval of that approach and of that calculation for this report. So at least this part of the weights and measures reporting has been validated and verified, and DMS is happy with it. So that was a good step forward. So to get time allocated into the support hours, there is a specific configuration, and I'm going to have to add clerical direct time to my timesheet. Okay, so let's just have a quick look in our configuration in timesheet categories under clerical direct. There's a weights and measures reporting time type, and it's either direct or support. Direct means it goes into the top portion. Support means any time that's reported using this timesheet category is going to end up in the CMR in that support box, which is right here. Okay, so if I go into clerical direct with my new configuration on Friday, I put 8 hours in here under weights and measures. And then I rerun my CMR. Oh, enable editing, thank you. I will see that 8 hours now appears under total weights and measures support hours.
Great. Okay. And so that could be Patty doing device billing, right? I think.
Not sure how that would tie into device billing.
It's clerical weights and measure support hours.
Yeah, when we do device billing, it's just based on the registration fee and the admin fee and the location fee.
I'm just saying her time.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Her time
for
preparing
doing that,
would be, would be
absolutely. The
support
time
hours.
preparing those invoices and everything would
Yep.
get recorded on the timesheet using that clerical indirect time. Perfect,
Yes.
yep. Yeah, the terms direct and indirect play into, and that's just one last thing I'll talk about the time entry here before we get on to some of the reporting. The terms direct and indirect really apply to that allocation process. And each of the AFS and the county monthly report have allocation processes for basically spreading time across programs based on the ratio of direct hours. And when you're doing indirect time, generally we're considering it indirect, although you can configure it to be weights and measures indirect and ag indirect. So in those cases, if it's ag indirect, it's only being spread across the ag program subprograms. And for weights indirect, it's only being spread across weights and measures subprograms. Or you can consider it completely indirect, in which case it gets spread across ag, weights and measures, PUE, cannabis, everything else. And just to give you the ultimate detail on that, when you're configuring timesheet categories, and I'll show you how this appears in the annual financial summary, but I can, I don't want to do it here. I would do it on, let's say, cannabis. Yeah. You can actually allocate direct and indirect like I described. You can also do above the line, which is it'll spread across ag and PUE. And you can have other categories that spread only below the line. So it will spread across weights and measures and all other programs. So you have a great deal of fine grained control over how an hour of time is represented in the AFS.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to reporting. I think that's it. There is one other weights and measures report I should show before we move on, and that is the county annual report. It's as important, but a little less interesting than I don't want to run that report. I want to run 23, 24. We're still in 24. A little less interesting than the county monthly report because there's less calculation that goes into it. But report page 1 with total hours and percent hours by program. And then page 2, total number of devices registered. And again, those are all calculated. The only twist on this report is counties that don't have a scanner ordinance need to go in and delete these registered checkout location numbers. They may do price verification inspections either across the board or as a complaints only basis, but according to DMS, if you don't have a county ordinance for scanner inspections, then those should be blanked out. So here's a list of all the different overtime codes and time codes that they use. And then here's a raw data dump of all the time, which program it's in, and which time code they build time to. So, and then I have a summary that just shows a cross tab of direct overtime, comp time, earned, various other codes for their time breakout. So, Kevin, have a look at that report, and then you and I can get together and have another conversation and see if there's any additional reporting we need to do around time codes build to get you the detail that you need. Okay, other reports are going to be of interest to everyone. Back on our time reports, various times people are going to have questions about total amount of time that's spent on parameter categories. And so we have a parameter time summary. And let me run this again for just a month. And this now gives me a breakout by parameter category for the month of the total hours, and then the raw data that goes into that calculation. So if I want to know, hey, I've got 12.8 hours for pest control records inspections, but I thought I should have more, I can now go in here and I can filter that on the parameter title and find all the individual records that make up that time. And that will help me narrow down if somebody says they did 6 hours, but I'm only seeing 5 hours here, then they might have reported it in the wrong place on their timesheet. So invariably, when counties switch from one system to another, there will be questions about the calculated parameter time, and we've preempted those by giving you the details you need in this report to figure that out. Let's go to our custom tracking report. Actually, I don't need to show you that one. Time audit, custom tracking. Our contract report. So I'd mentioned when we were talking about ag data entry, one of the additional objectives that we've added on in CalCATS is the ability to help you do your contract invoicing. And one of the most important reports for that is to look at your data pulled out by contract. So if I run their EGVM trapping contract for January through December 24, I'll pick all users and I'll actually run it for a calendar year. This report now gives me all the time that's been billed to that contract, who billed it, which date it was on, how many hours, where it was billed on the timesheet, and what classification was entered. And then it provides me a summary total by staff person, by labor rate, total labor hours, total cost. And then I have a neat little summary that shows me by month and year our accrued labor mileage and expenses cost, as well as total cost. If I had entered a contract cap amount on here, it would also show me a highlight if I'm within 10% of my cap or if I exceed the contract cap. So again, this is going to maintenance of effort and looking at your contracts and making sure you're going to hit those contract amounts by the end of the year. And then lastly, let's take a look at the final report that we've targeted, which is the annual financial summary. And let me run this for 23-24. The nice thing about being able to run the report out of CalCATS is you can run it at any time during the fiscal year. You don't have to wait to the very end to see your numbers. So if you run it, in January or February, you have a half a year's worth of data to base it on, and you can see where you stand total cost wise on all of your different programs. This one is definitely going to take a minute or two to run. It's doing a great deal of data crunching. One of the questions that came up when we were designing this annual financial statement is, how do we deal with people that have labor rate changes or salary changes during the middle of a year? And the answer to that is, I don't know if we have any of those in Placer County for last year, but We actually produce an individual row for every employee that shows their hours by program. And if you had a rate change during the year, you'll have 2 rows. And your first row will be at your first salary, and your second row will be your second salary. And the hours, since we track the hours that are billed day by day, the day of your salary switch, of your rate change, your hours will switch from one row to the next. So when they calculate out, they'll calculate out at the appropriate billing rate for the day that the hour was charged on. So the end result we're looking for here is this report, which gives you your direct labor costs, your allocation percentages, and your indirect labor costs, and then your total for all of your ag program breakouts, your PUE, and then your other programs, which are weights and measures, and then any other program that we define for you. And the programs are unlimited. So we have counties that have predatory animal control, and you'll see here Land Conservation Act, Fish and Game Commission, animal shelter, all kinds of different things that county commissioners get lumped with. And again, thinking back to our timesheet, if you don't need any detail on those, you can set them up as straight entry categories where people just type in their time on that row. But if, say, for predatory animal control, you need to track some details about which species you're working on and which region of the county you're in, you can build a little custom form that will track that information and regurgitate that for your invoicing for that contract. So working backwards from here, we'll go back to the beginning. We start out with our direct labor hours by employee. And actually, here we have, no, I thought I saw someone with a rate change, but it looks like we don't have any rate changes in the middle of the year. But we have hourly rate and then total direct hours by subprogram all the way across the board. And then we have indirect labor hours, and this is where we get really creative on how we allocate this time. There's time that's no program assigned, which they don't use, but that is time that would be spread across everything on the AFS on that final sheet. You have ag program time that gets allocated across the 10 ag programs. And then you've got stuff that's spread above the line and stuff that's spread below the line. So your timesheet category configuration can direct time either to direct labor hours or to any of these indirect categories. And then for each of those indirect categories, we have a allocation sheet that explicitly shows you the allocation calculations above the line, below the line, indirect, and ag subprogram. And just one neat little detail, when we do our ag subprogram allocation, we have time that's billed directly to ag program to be allocated. But if you have a no program assigned hour, if you have an hour that's being allocated across the board, some portion of that's going to end up in the ag program. So we include that in our ag subprogram allocation. So, and everything in here are live formulas. So if I change any of these, if I go to indirect labor hours, and for John Sorfleet, I put in 200 hours here, everything recalculates immediately. So now when I go to my ag subprogram allocation, you'll see I've got $1,600 that was allocated from our indirect program allocation that I now have to allocate in the ag subprogram allocation as well. And all of those formulas are live and recalculate on the fly. So a very neat report. Took me a very long time to generate, and I think it's being met with a great deal of success at this point in helping counties prepare their AFS pretty pronto compared to years past.
Thank you, John.
Oh, I hope you'll enjoy it.
I'm gonna love this one.
as much as Anna enjoyed it, definitely. But yeah, I think last year, well, this year, I think we have either 4 or 5 counties are preparing, 80 or 90% of their AFS using this process. Shasta takes this and then they fiddle with it a little bit, but still it cuts out a huge amount of time for them.